Hello and welcome to Doordarshan News. I am Sidhant Sibal and with me is Rohan. In next half an hour, we will discuss what happened at the 14th Policymakers and Regulators Meet here in Goa. Well, the theme this time around was democracy versus development. And Rohan, tell me, what was the various topics which were discussed under this banner?
Siddhant, I think this topic, democracy versus development, was very important, especially considering the fact it's a power sector meet. And what the problem that most of the power sector leaders are facing today, there are issues of land acquisition, there are issues of tribal rights that are. So basically in this session, it was these things were discussed, and this theme was very important considering the fact that almost I think all the leaders here agreed that it is not democracy versus development. They all said it's democracy and development can coexist. Yeah. So this was the theme, and I think considering the power scenario today, this topic was very important.
But well, in power sector also, number of topics were discussed, like the geopolitics of power, how terrorists tend to attack on power installations now. Also on India's power needs, what are the problems, what are the challenges about the Electricity Act. So let's begin the program with us. As we said, the main theme at the meet was democracy versus development. Does democracy helps in better development, or does it hampers development, slows the process? Or is it democracy versus development, or democracy and development? We talked to two politicians, Dinesh Trivedi and Kalikesh Singh Deo. This time around at the 14th IPPAI meet, democracy versus development was the main theme. With me is member of the Lok Sabha, Mr. Dinesh Trivedi. Sir, welcome to Doordarshan News. So my first question is democracy a luxury when it comes to development in the country?
No, I think basically every human being needs democracy because your mind has to be without fear and the head has to be held high. And that's only parliamentary democracy can give you. Having said that, but democracy without giving dignity to the people is of no use. So the basic thing we have to understand is to give basics to the citizen because after all, democracy is the power of the people.
We have seen that democracy has come in the way of development, especially reforms in this country. We have seen crucial reforms being installed in the parliament, crucial bills being installed in the parliament because of this same democracy.
See, democracy is a very slow process. It's like a slow elephant walking because you have got to ensure that you are not doing injustice. For example, land. Let's talk about land. That there is the right of an individual versus the power of the state. I as an individual, I have a right to say that, sorry, I don't want to give up my land. But the state doesn't have to force on me. The state has to convince me. And that is where we all have to work together for the development.
Same parliament, we see there is almost no talks. Whenever there is crucial issue being raised, all the members of the parliament, or most of the members, rush into the well.
That is the danger of democracy. And that is where I feel if this continues, then the very temple of democracy, very essence of democracy, which is the Parliament of India, if that doesn't function, then the man out on the street says that if the Parliament doesn't function, who's going to raise issues which I want my public representative to go up and raise the issue? So his confidence level in democracy is shaken.
Don't you think that the members of this temple of democracy have somehow betrayed the cause of the Aam Aadmi?
I am quite saddened when the parliament doesn't function. You can disagree, doesn't matter. You can go up and say that, sorry, I don't agree. And I said that until very recently, in 1990, I was a member of parliament first time. I've never seen this kind of thing. So somewhere the checks and balance, otherwise you are heading for anarchy.
So my last question is: the monsoon session of the parliament is set to begin soon. How successful do you think will it be?
I can only hope. With Telangana, we'll have pro, we'll have against, we'll have a lot of other smaller states asking for their right. And there are many issues. I'm a little skeptical. I just hope and pray that overall senses will prevail on us The Honorable Speaker, she always tries. The Honorable Chairman always tries. I just hope and pray.
Thank you so much, sir. So that was Dinesh Trivedi, member of the Lok Sabha, talking exclusively to DT News.
Malikesh, as a young MP, how do you see this whole debate of development and democracy? Is it actually development versus democracy or development and democracy? How do you see it?
No, there is no dichotomy or contradiction between development and democracy. I think what democracy does do is changes the way that development is perceived and implemented.
You come from Orissa, from Bolangir. There are issues of tribal rights, there are issue of mining, and also there's a need for development. So how to strike a balance between the two? What's your view?
No, certainly the state of Odisha and the government of Odisha is very, very cautious and humane when it deals with R&R issues and displacement of tribals and forest dwellers. And we have I think, one of the most generous R&R policies. However, we do need industries too. And we need to shift people from marginal farming to industrial productivity. So it's a delicate balance, and the government tries to balance keeping all views into account.
Related to that, there's one hot topic which is making news everywhere is Niyamgiri and Vedanta thing. The tribals, the villagers, they have rejected Vedanta now completely. So how do you see this issue and what's the way forward? When your state government has been saying and they wanted Vedanta to come to the state.
Well, Vedanta's factory is already there in the state. It's a question of mining which has been disallowed, which will be disallowed as per the Supreme Court's rulings. And I don't think that's such an issue because you can always get the bauxite from other mines from the state. I think the government and the companies need to elaborate further on the developmental activities of any project, CSR activities, how they can involve the tribals in their own existing plan and programs.
Your party is in the government now in Odisha. What they're planning now? How they will deal with this situation? Now the tribals have rejected Vedanta. So what is going to happen now after this?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure because I'm not in the government. So I think it's a decision the government will take when it comes to them. Right now, it's still in the Gram Sabha stage, and the report will go through Supreme Court to the government.
But let's ask a journalist. After all, journalists tend to provide an almost unbiased view of the debate.
Debate on democracy versus development. Do you think actually there's something called versus, or democracy and development both can coexist?
They have to go together. They must go together. Because if you have development and no democracy, then sooner or later that development will be completely eclipsed. And similarly, if you have democracy but hardly any development, then again there are problems. So the two have to go together.
So it's like, the Supreme Court had asked the Gram Sabhas there, the state government to conduct a Gram Sabhas to get a consent from the Gram Panchayats for the Vedanta project, whether it should be there or not.
Listen, as a rule, let me tell you, it is of the utmost importance to try and persuade people whose land, whose forests you are about to take over for big projects. I'm not against big projects. I think development is important. But unless you consider the people who have been on that land for generations as stakeholders in the project, I think you're going to face problems. And the problems will include, one of the terrible things that have happened is precisely because it is people who've exploited these stakeholders that we've had problems like Naxalites. So you've got to face it. Today's India means that the stakeholders are the people, and those people have to be taken into account. And this doesn't necessarily mean more money. There are ways and ways. There are enough experiments in the country where these stakeholders have been told that you'll be given jobs, you'll be given skill development, and so on and so forth. You've got to look at various ways, but you just can't go there and for a song buy a place and so on. That's not on.
Sometimes local politics takes over, and they try to persuade people that no, you don't give your lands, and sometimes local politics are also involved. So
no, because we are a democracy, other voices can also be heard. So they will listen to the local people, they'll listen to the others. You've got NGOs, for example, who again will say no to any project, etc. But you have got other people who will come. But ultimately, let me tell you, our people are a very pragmatic people. They may be swayed by emotion once in a while, but in the end, they're a very pragmatic lot. And I see this in case after case where after a lot of hangama, things get resolved. All right? This is why you need democracy, you need debate. Now, how long should the debate continue? I think we've got to be patient.
And sir, also, I mean, now after Telangana, the demand for smaller states have again risen up, and like Ajit Singh saying, Haryana Pradesh has again calling these kinds of statements. So, how you see the solution to this? More and more states.
First of all, the case of Telangana is very different. The demand for Telangana, which was a merger, and therefore they say it's a demerger and not a separation, and I think they're right, should not be really put in the same place with the other demands that are coming. My view, which I'll say succinctly, is the government of India needs to have a second States Reorganization Commission to examine all these demands that are made, because these demands have been made simply because our democracy has worked.
सीमेंट सस्ता नहीं सबसे अच्छा।
वही 7 का अलार्म, वही बाथरूम की रेस, वही दादी की घंटी और मक्खन वाले वही आलू के पराठे। रात की वो रंगरलियां भुलाने में सुबह की हर चीज काम आएगी और जिंदगी ऐसे चलती रहेगी मानो कभी कुछ हुआ ही नहीं। HIV के लक्षण सामने आने में कई साल लग सकते हैं। अगर आपने किसी के साथ बिना कॉन्डोम के यौन संबंध रखे हैं या सुई से नशा किया है तो ICTC में आज ही HIV टेस्ट करवाएं। जरूरत पड़ने पर सलाह और दवाई से आप सामान्य जिंदगी जी सकते हैं।
Power also featured in the 14th Regulators and Policymakers meet. The main question was fuel supply issues. Was it the biggest threat to power sector? India's power sector needs fuel to run. India largely imports its coal on which its thermal power plants run. Coal India Limited last month signed long-term contracts for supplying coal to most of NTPC's new power plants, capping months of dispute after the state-owned miner agreed to evaluation of coal quality by independent agencies at all its mines starting October. Coal India Limited had agreed to supply 60 million tons of coal annually to NTPC's new units, which have a combined generation capacity of 9,620 megawatts. There was also the issue of transmission, grid failures and grid constraints. And transmission and distribution remain a key challenge in the sector. Remember, India has a huge power capacity, but its distribution still needs reforms. Let's hear from leading voices from the summit.
It's not so expensive. I mean, if you look at the solar power, initially about 3 years back was 17 rupees when the bids were made. And now, it has come down to about 8 rupees.
One of the biggest challenges in terms of distribution is to make power available to the large masses. And I'm not just speaking of Delhi, but I'm talking across the country, where 40% of our population still goes without power.
The necessity is to have large transmission, large meaning large magnitude of megawatt and large distances to be covered, because we are a large country geographically with a vast population. So it throws up the problems which are therefore large in nature.
And can smart grid be the solution? Smart grid is confluence of information, communications and electrical and digital technologies. Smart grid, apart from facilitating real-time monitoring and control of power system, will help in reduction of AT and C losses, peak load management, demand response, integration of renewable energy, power quality management, outage management, etc. Smart grid will act as a backbone infrastructure to enable new business models like smart city, electric vehicles, etc. And can geopolitics and power be separated? Remember the Iran-Pakistan-India pipeline. There is a paradigm shift in the way the world approaches energy security. One of the most important changes is the shale gas discovery in America. It seems that the Persian and Gulf countries will no longer be the center of oil producing countries. The challenge now is, can India join these countries for energy resources? India has to learn the changing global energy scenario and exploit it to its advantage. And there are a number of Indian companies scavenging the globe to find new energy resources. India and China, who have a growing appetite for power, are also competing with each other for new power resources for their economy. We met two ambassadors, G. Parthasarthi, former High Commissioner of India to Pakistan, and Meera Shankar, former Ambassador of India to America, on how geopolitics and power are related. Energy forms a key component of geopolitics. With me is former Ambassador to Pakistan, Ambassador G. Parthasarthi. Sir, welcome to Doordarshan News. So my first question is, sir, how important or how interrelated is energy and geopolitics?
Well, you know, historically, from the beginning of the 20th century, most politics of the world have been dominated on how developed countries, whether it is Britain or the America, could get access to oil. Even the Second World War, the main aim of the Germans was to get access to Middle East oil. So energy has since then been a question of rivalry. When the Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan, the Americans created the Central Command to be able to fight them if they should come into the oil-bearing areas. For India, it is of crucial importance because we have to grow at 7 to 8% to give a better life to our people. You cannot grow that fast without reliable supplies of energy at reasonable prices.
My second question is, there's a term in global geopolitics, the great game around the Caspian Sea. They say in Caspian Sea there's huge amount of oil resources. Is the great game coming to an end since the discovery of shale gas in America, oil prices are at a new low?
No, I think the rivalry now for oil resources and gas resources in Central Asia is largely between China and Russia. Russia has surplus oil and gas, but yet historically from the days of the Soviet Union, all these areas, Caspian, Central Asia, their pipelines used to be through Russia. China is building its own pipelines. China is negotiating with Russia. So Russia will look to supply these to Japan, to Korea, so that it is not dependent on China. So the new game is really Central Asia, Caspian, yes.
So it's said there's a shale gas revolution happening in America. What will be the impact of this shale gas revolution? And if America becomes energy independent from the rest of the world, will its intervention in the Middle East is going to come to a halt or will it decrease?
You see, American interests will continue to be global, but their dependence on Middle East oil is going to become zero. So they will wield influence, and the influence of Saudi Arabia on the US and its allies is going to will wane. So certainly, given their support from Israel, for Israel, I think that will continue, and they're going to be there.
So my other question is on India and Pakistan. Pakistan is energy deficient in a sense. There have been talked about 500 megawatts of energy from India, and can we use this energy as energy diplomacy, a new diplomacy from cricket diplomacy to energy diplomacy?
Well, let me put it this way. If the Pakistanis realize that their street lights in Lahore and their houses in Lahore are being lighted by electricity from India, it does change their perception and approach towards India. I mean, after all, if a person finds that his hospitals, his houses all being lit from India, it's good. But Pakistan will try its best to become self-reliant within the next 5 to 10 years.
So Russia has been using energy as a source of diplomacy, the energy diplomacy, Russia's energy diplomacy, Gazprom. Can India emulate the same thing with its neighbors?
No, for the simple reason that we are energy deficient and we don't have the resources to export. But people seem to forget one thing. Our largest single export, $44 billion, are finished petroleum products from our refineries. So I think what we need to do is build up refinery capacity so that markets in our neighborhood get their finished petroleum products, oil, diesel, everything from India. And I think we're doing that.
So my last question is, there's a great game happening between India and China across the world for resources, oil, whether it's mineral, especially in Africa. But it's been seen that Indian companies, state-owned Indian companies, are not that active when it comes to the Chinese company like Sinopec, who actually most of the times when I read the newspaper reports, Sinopec tends to checkmate the Indian companies. I don't want to name Indian companies.
Well, I don't. The fact of the matter is, the Chinese companies have far more resources than we have. Don't forget, China's economy is 4 times our size. Don't forget that the surplus capacities which their companies, their public undertakings have is enormous, bank credit. The other thing is, I am rather careful in exploiting other people's resources. Well, I think what China is doing in Africa, rushing in to exploit their resources, is already started to get it a bad name. And it's not going to be productive for them in the long term.
सीमेंट सस्ता नहीं सबसे अच्छा।
मैं आप सबको बताना चाहूंगा कि महात्मा गांधी राष्ट्रीय रोजगार गारंटी अधिनियम के तहत अब कई नए काम हमारे गांव में चल रहे हैं। SC/ST भूमि धारकों की खेती की जमीन पर सिंचाई का जल पहुंचाने के लिए कुओं और नालियों का निर्माण किया गया है।
हाँ, और निर्धन किसानों की बंजर भूमि को भी विकसित किया जा रहा है। गांव में ही मुर्गी पालन के लिए एक शेड का निर्माण भी किया गया है। ऐसे ही और भी बहुत से अतिरिक्त काम हैं जिन्हें अब मनरेगा के तहत किया जा सकता है।
गांव का विकास, भारत का विकास।
A lot has been said about democracy in this summit, the IPPAI summit happening here in Goa. With me is the former ambassador to US, Meera Shankar. Ma'am, welcome to Doordarshan News. Ma'am, my first question is, does democracy impede the growth which is being talked about at the summit? Does it create problems, or is it a luxury which India cannot actually afford much?
I wouldn't agree with that. I think that India's uniqueness has been that we have been able to combine democracy and development. And in the last 10 years or so, before the global economic crisis, we were growing at over 8% along with democracy. Now there is a global downturn, and there are also problems of governance or missteps within India itself.
So you are saying that democracy is the best way forward by which India can be governed, given the fact it's a diverse country, and probably this diversity cannot be contained in a dictatorial form of governance.
I would agree. I think, everybody keeps saying that democracy is a terrible form of governance because, it can paralyze decision making and so forth. But the only thing is that all other forms of governance are worse.
We see other countries which don't have democratic form of governance, like China, able to achieve better growth and better governance system for their own citizen. So now there comes a counter question that dictatorial form of government, howsoever bad it is, it at least gives minimum standard of governance and ease of business in the country also.
Well, it depends what you're talking about, because if you look around South Asia, which is where we should compare ourselves because we started from the same base, then I don't think that any of the countries like Pakistan or others who did not have a democratic base, or Nepal or whatever, have done better than India. With all our problems, India has gone forward, and you could have had, a very different path.
On democracy in the other developed countries, especially in Western Europe and America, democracy there is doing fine. Democracy has its origin in Greece. But we are lately seeing that democratic things are just not working there. Let's talk about America, where the debt ceiling crisis happened because both the parties were not willing to talk to each other properly. And also about the European Union, where democracy has led to kind of economic crisis across Europe, a divide between Southern Europe and Northern Europe.
I don't think democracy is the reason for that. I think it's bad economics. and excessive risk-taking. Initially with the global economic crisis, it was a crisis of financial capital, and then it spread to the economies. Yes, but sometimes it can be difficult to take tough decisions because Europe is having to cut back, you know, the social welfare state which they had developed. They are cutting back. I mean, some of the countries like Greece have had to reduce jobs, reduce salaries, cut back pensions.
Personally, what do you think, which is a better way of governance, democracy or a person just ruling the state? I don't want to use the autocratic, but a single point person or democracy.
Well, let me say, I think that you can't have a one-size-fits-all approach. You know, each society must find its genius in the way that it governs itself. But overall, I think a society which is participatory, where people have a say in governance, and where there are checks and balances on power, is a more evolved society.
My last question, since you have been a former ambassador to America, one of the most powerful nations, what do you think about the future of world international diplomacy, international relations? I would like to say that at one side we are saying America's power waning, at other side we are saying a rising China, a more aggressive China. Where do you think the world will be 10 years from now?
Well, I think let's not write off the US as yet. They're still the most powerful country in the world. Yes, China is rising very fast, and one of the big challenges for the world is how are we going to anchor China as a responsible citizen, if I may say so, within the global system.
Thank you so much. So that was the former ambassador to US, Meera Shankar, talking exclusively to Doordarshan News. That's all in part 1 of our special on power sector and the IPPAI summit. In next edition, that is part 2 of the program to be telecasted on 18th August 2013, we will find out how policymakers, entrepreneurs and DG of IPPAI met at the summit and talked about various issues plaguing the country.